Right. So starting off, the very first thing that we would like to know is what are the most important qualities that you think should be in a good manager?
Um, so I'd probably start off with drawing a distinction between manager as a title and manager as a role. Uh, Manager as a title is how we, I think, generally understand, and that's the most popularly referred to word. But then I also would like to distinguish between managing as a concept or as a role. And I'm not necessarily saying one is more important than the other, but I just want to make sure that we draw a distinction between the two. Oftentimes both get confused for the same thing, and I think that's where sometimes problems occur. So manages the title, of course, is is there. It's reflective of the organizational hierarchy. It is how organizations are really set up, and when you have people involved, you need someone to uh, uh, to essentially take care of them, take care of their work, be responsible for their work product or work output. That's where manager as a title does come in. That's what we popularly call as, okay, he's my manager, she's my manager. Then the other aspect I want to talk about is manager as a role, which is essentially someone who's willing to take responsibility for a group of people, not just with respect to their work output, which is the what part of what we do in organizations, but also the how. And how essentially would then involve their behaviors at workplace, their conduct, their motivations, moods, and all of that. So a lot of emotional human element really comes into there. I would kind of say that every manager who comes with a title may not always display or play that particular role. Uh, some individuals may restrict themselves to just being a manager on paper, while some others would probably go ahead and really look at people as a whole. So I think today, when we go to the workplace, we bring our whole selves to the organization. I don't go to my workplace only to do work. I mean, of course, that's my primary responsibility, but when I go to my workplace, I'm taking my whole self. Therefore, when I look at the role of a manager, I would say that she or he must be able to manage similarly the whole person and not just that fraction of me which is doing the work output. So that would be like a summary response to your question. But if I have to break it down, I would say managers need to be responsible for two or three things. One is, of course, uh, you know, managing of people who are collectively contributing to your organizational success. So the core work product, the core work output, which binds me to the organization. Second, and equally important, if not more, is the managing emotions and well-being of people, which means that a manager must absolutely be equipped and be competent to handle a diversity of people that are working with him, uh, and also be able to balance out the varied perspectives that come as part of managing a large group. And three, uh, being able to provide a higher standard of behavior, I think is incumbent on the manager. So the manager's behavior needs to be way above the average of the entire team, because for me that is the only way organizations grow from being good to best. If the manager's behavior is anything less, uh, I think overall, when we speak of work culture, that work culture probably goes down. So a manager always has to be above the average team, behavior. Therefore, it's heavily incumbent on the manager to ensure that this happens. So that would, again, just a breakdown of maybe what I said at the beginning, but I hope that answers your question, Vivek.
Does it helps a lot? And I think it very much coincides with the fact that our professor keeps calling manager in the same vein as leader. So it makes a lot of sense when you say that
Yes, yes,
generally the managers are supposed to show a better conduct compared to the rest of the team. I think that's how they set an example for the rest of the team. So
yes,
thank you so
yes.
much for your answer, Niranjan. Moving on to the next question. Um, what is your personal management philosophy? And do you feel it has evolved over time? If so, how?
So I'm pretty hands-on as a manager, which means I think growing up the ranks is very essential for a manager. Anybody aspiring to lead people must have got their hands dirty, and must be willing to get their hands dirty even today. So uh, when I started off, and I started off way back in 2004, as I told you, working. This is my 20th year of my career. My first job in talent acquisition, or what's commonly called as recruitment, was issuing offer letters. Uh, Today, probably for the last 8 years, that's not really been my core responsibility. But let's say if I have a complete team outage, and let's say everybody goes on leave due to some unforeseen reasons, even today I'm quite capable of doing it. Which means while today it is my job to get it done, from different people, I should still have the ability to be able to do the ground level work, which never goes and which should never really go away from a manager's menu of events for the day. Uh, so that is one, which is being able to operate at the ground level as much as being able to operate at a strategic level. So today, maybe strategy will be the biggest part of my role, but doesn't mean that I wouldn't know how do I go and take an interview? How do I go and issue an offer letter? How do I go and conduct an exit interview? I should be able to do it with the same level of competency that somebody in my team, would be able to, do. That is one. Two, I think my own personal philosophy is that a manager's role is probably one of the biggest liabilities you can take upon yourself, because it's it's great title, comes with a lot of perks, all of it. But for me, it is the most humble role that needs to exist, because you are responsible not for yourself alone anymore, but you are now responsible for a group of individuals whose careers, whose day to day life, and a large part of their well being today, because we spend what, 70 to 80% of our like a week at the office, trying to do a job. There is no way we can exclude the role of a company and that of a manager from someone's well-being. So for me, unless and until I am able to consider myself, I mean, not hierarchically, but in terms of, where I need to position at, at the lowest level. So humble leadership is extremely, extremely important. One cannot assume that merely because hierarchically one is at the very top, it gives us any right to, literally boss over anyone. So for me, humility comes as the biggest, aspect of leadership. And for me, a checkpoint always is, am I becoming too arrogant with, with respect to what I am doing? And that's a checkpoint I would frequently like to enable in my mind whenever I'm making decisions, or just spending my work day. So arrogance has absolutely no place in managing people. one has to literally, you have to throw your ego out, you have to throw everything away. The only reason managers should exist is for this particular reason. Um, and three, I would say that um, I think, I think this came in Spider-Man or whatever. Great power comes great responsibility. I've been a huge fan of that statement ever since I heard it. But for me, that's very true because, frankly, managers are about 20-25% in an organization at the most. I mean, that's the average. It could go as less as 10%. But a lot of power dwells in this particular role. uh, you have power of course, I mean, people reporting to you is the biggest power you have, but then the organization also equips you with a lot of tools, resources, decision making abilities. I think all of this needs to be understood as a gift, and make sure that you use it really, really well. And when I say all of this, I know I could tend to sound more philosophical or more, trying to say, oh, it's a very emotional role. No, I think for a manager also, like I have to develop my own career. But the only way I'm going to be able to develop my career is by making sure that these three aspects are taken care of. So if I intend to become, the director, the VP, the CEO, I don't think any of these would, be unrelatable. In fact, the higher I go up, these three aspects, in my opinion, only need to become more and more stronger.
Makes a lot of sense. I mean, until you mentioned it, I was thinking about the very same line, with great power comes great responsibility. So yeah, I think your answer matched the quote very well. Um, I would move on to the next question, which would be, do you have a strategic plan for your team? If so, how do you develop this plan? And how does your planning method relate to team member growth and development?
Um, so, I would look at it in two ways. One is, of course, there are goals and objectives of any department, which usually are a reflection of the company's strategy. Um, I would say that the strategy I have for my team uh, could be, or sorry, would be exactly reflecting what the company's strategy is, no different. Um, where it would take a different turn is the interpretation of the company strategy as to how does this company strategy sort of reflect from, because I lead HR, how does it reflect and how does it look from a HR angle? With that exception, the strategy for HR would be exactly the strategy that the company has. Um, the second part, you'll have to say that again, Vivek, because I just want to make sure I get it right. What was the second question?
Sure. So I think if there is a strategic plan, then how do we develop that? And
Ah,
how is it related to the growth and development of team members?
okay, okay. So as I said, right, so there is a company level strategy, which by all means should reflect. So that's exactly what we need to follow. But I think there is it's nearly difficult for people to understand, or I would say articulate, what does a company strategy mean in their day-to-day work life. So more often than not, I find that employees are not able to relate to what this company is trying to do, because strategy documents or vision purpose, they are either too difficult to understand or they're too philosophical in nature. Both don't pose it very well when it comes to putting that into action. So first and foremost, I think it begins with articulating strategy in a language that your team members understand. Being able to tell them that when the company is saying this is our mission, this is our purpose, this is what it means to you in your role and at your level. So that's one. Second, connecting that with where the employee aspirations lie. Again, uh, you know, it's one thing for us to articulate the company strategy, but unless and until I'm able to personally relate to it, uh, So I've understood the strategy in my language, which is step one. Second is I need to now see how does this connect with where I want to go. If I'm not able to connect my personal aspirations with the company strategy, there is no way I will meaningfully contribute to attaining that strategy. So that's the second bit. And the third bit would be continuously checking in how this journey of my personal aspiration meeting company strategy is going on. So in the first step, well, I've articulated it well. Second step, I have connected it with where I wish to go personally. But in the third step, frequent check-ins, with my manager or with the peer group or with my stakeholders is very very critical for me to make sure that I am going in the right direction. Otherwise, I would have done a great job of the first two, but without periodic check-ins, maybe once in a quarter, once in a year, but definitely not anything more than that, I should be able to understand whether I'm going in the right direction, which gives me the confidence that, one, of course, it gives me the confidence that uh, all of this is, going in the right direction. Secondly, it tells me that, this is happening for real and it is not just something that is written on paper. So, three steps I would say to sort of deploying the strategy at a team level. And when these frequent check-ins happen and when I'm engaged in a continuous conversation with my team members on how how is the strategy actually being executed upon, gaps will arise, and it's natural for gaps to arise. It is these gaps that lead to training and development opportunities for individuals concerned. um, because again, one of the reasons I believe why training and development starts with a bang and pretty much ends without anything meaningful is because they are not linked to the big picture. The big picture being the strategy of the organization, articulated in the language I understand, and connected to my personal, goals and aspirations. So we have the, I think, we have the best of training programs available in the world today. Yet, why is it that only some organizations claim to be highly successful when it comes to their leadership and culture, etc.? Everybody has access, everybody has resources. There's the same training. You have some of, I mean, you yourself are part of a brilliant learning institute. Why is it that attrition continues to be so high? Why is it that people continue to find disengagement with organizations even today, right? A lot of it is to do with the fact that my actions are not connected to the big picture, and then these gaps are being addressed through training programs. People are attending a lot of them. It's amazing, the locations, the offsites, everything is great, but all of this is operating like a you know three dots, and they are not really connecting into a triangle. So the connection is very important. So training and development again, therefore, becomes a subset or more like a gap identification after you have done the first two steps, after or the first three steps.
Makes a lot of sense. So I think, as you mentioned, right, that I think connecting ourselves with the aligning ourselves with the company's goals, and then making sure that we connect the dots through continuous feedback and developing training programs. I think that's going to help us a lot in connecting with
Yes,
the strategy of the company overall. So thank you so much for your answer, Niranjan. I'll pass on to Shan to take us through the next round of questions. Over to you,
sure.
Shan.
Thanks, Vivek. Thanks, Niranjan. A lot of your philosophies are some of the things we have been learning in class recently. Especially even we had a discussion on the entire "with great power comes great responsibility" quote as well. So I think we can resonate a lot with whatever you're saying, and it's great to have your views. So I have a couple more questions. I'd like your thoughts on as well. So let me get started. The first one would be, what are your views on equity, diversity, inclusivity, and indigenization in an organization?
So I think, the debate around equity, inclusivity has been quite a center table discussion, especially in the last 10 or 12 years. But I'd like to believe that ever since industrialization started, which is 60, 70, 80 years back, this has always, sorry, did I lose you guys?
We
Yeah,
we have we can hear you now. Yeah, you're back
yeah,
now.
Oh, sorry. Okay. So I think it's always been around. It's just that it seems to have taken center stage now, and it is now practically become. I mean, I cannot think of a single organization today that says, "Oh, we don't want to practice diversity and inclusion." It would be a almost like a okay, let's lock up the company kind of a statement. No organization today does it. The problem is, uh, I mean, firstly, I fully believe that an organization can exist. I mean, I'm not even saying succeed. I'm saying exist only because it follows some sensible diversity and inclusion practices. Homogenizing, there is no way organizations can succeed. And that's why I'm saying if you read into the history of modern workplace, which starts about 70 years back, equity, inclusion have always been part of any company's culture. More conversation is happening around it today. Some of it is linked to politicking. Uh, and my concern is that in this whole aspiration of trying to latch on to the latest trend, organizations may purely end up giving lip service to the concept of DEI, and that's where my personal concern lies. But coming to what I feel, I personally believe, and coming from India, you know, you are never far away from any kind of diversity and inclusion because you have so much of it available in India. And I would largely say that about the world. But I mean, because I'm in India, I'm going to be a bit biased that, around me itself, there's so much diversity at home, in the office, on the road, wherever I go. So I think it begins with recognizing and making a very conscious, I would say, conscious effort to look at the place around you, wherever you are, if it's your workplace or whichever place, and make a very conscious effort to say, what are the differences I see, in and around me. I think once we get into this mindset of recognizing differences forcefully, we will realize that even if you have, like, in your class, right, I'm sure in your class of I don't know, whatever the size is, 40, 50, 100 people, I'm sure you would easily recognize things like, okay, all of you come from different cultures, you have all of you have different skin colors, all of you have different languages you speak. Most obvious differences. But I'm sure when you get together in groups, you feel, okay, we are homogenizing because we all tend to get together in groups that are similar to us. Even there, if you make a conscious effort, you will probably find at least 10 differences if you spend just 10 minutes reflecting on how different this is. So, instead of trying to sort of run behind the fad of trying to say, oh yeah, we love DEI and this and that, and in reality literally play lip service, I think the mindset we need to get into is that I will consciously recognize the differences around me before I start recognizing the similarities around me. I think that's very, very important. Now, the moment I make a very conscious effort to, recognize differences, somewhere it tunes my mind to also accept differences. Trust me, we may say that we've come a long way in trying to accept differences and be more inclusive. Somewhere I'd like to believe that we are actually taking steps backward also in organizations because of this fad that has come with DEI. Everybody wants to appear cool, but in reality, if I do not even know how to recognize differences and make a conscious effort of, like, literally running behind differences, it's just lip service. So uh, only when I forcefully when I say forcefully, I don't mean it in a bad way. What I mean is, I'm hungry for recognizing how different this group is. That leads me to accept the fact that there are differences. And then I can leverage upon the fact that there are a ton of differences. And this is actually a recipe for success rather than otherwise. Uh, you know, in our organization also, of course, gender diversity today is one of the most visible forms of diversity, and therefore it is spoken about so much. But one of the earliest forms of diversity that we embraced is that, like in our office, and someday I hope to see all of you in person. I mean, maybe when Vivek comes, all of you should join him. We've celebrated cultural diversity as an organization ever since we were set up, long before companies were talking about it. Because at least 60% of our population comes from outside of our location, which is Hyderabad. We have people from everywhere. Um, so, practically speaking, I think we've celebrated cultural diversity even before people started talking about it. Even today, that's the case. At least half of our people do not belong to Hyderabad, but they've made Hyderabad their home. So I think gender, of course, it is important because there's been heavy underrepresentation of a equally competent working class, which is women. And we must make sure that the initial hindrances that women face when it comes to entry, those aspects are removed by organizations. And it is our responsibility as a company to make sure we do that. But let us, that's what I keep telling my team as well, that don't just look at women as a demography to be achieved. Let us try go beyond that, and make sure that how do we address this particular issue of non-inclusivity or poor diversity at a more fundamental level. So what we have started doing is, we said, okay, one thing is, okay, how do we attain a 20%, 30%, 40% gender diversity? Yeah, we will do that. But now we've started partnering with universities to say that if the source of the issue lies at university admission stage, and one of the reasons that, let's say, because we are essentially into mechanical engineering as a discipline, one of the reasons why, let's say, women wouldn't want to take up mechanical engineering, I don't know how true it is today, but at some point they always thought it was a man's job. They always thought that there wouldn't be any employment opportunity when women join the workplace. So we are saying, well, what if we as a company go and sit at your admission table and say that if you are interested in mechanical, take it up. We will promise you a job 4 years from now. I have taken away the very argument they have against, right? This is how we are doing it because we are into mechanical engineering. I'm sure, there's hundreds of disciplines. If each industry starts doing something like this, I think that would be a great way to promote, say, gender diversity. Now, let's assume that now, if you look at software industry, they have a far better gender diversity than most other industries. Now, I think I would say it's incumbent on them to now look at others. For instance, you know, people with disabilities very rarely find a job in, say, software. Why? Because you have to use computers. And without a limb, you may not be able to operate on computers. But in today's day and age, should it really matter that, let's say, I'm short of a limb, a hand, maybe there are ways to figure it out. So we should not rest with laurels as soon as, because gender diversity is very visible, it looks great, fine. But now that I've achieved that, now let me go on to, something else. A lot of children who are born with autism or some kind of disability, mental disability, do not find a job in practically any industry you talk about today. But there are ways and means. So I think people who have achieved, let's say, in one aspect should now move on to the next aspect and then teach the rest of the world how to do it. While the rest of us are catching up, let's say, on gender, others should move on too. Does that answer some of the questions, Shan?
Yeah, I think yeah, it's a great response. You touched upon important things that we discussed rather than having tokenism. or forced
Yes.
diversity, you're addressing it at the root cause. So you're not saying that you have a gender issue because you're refusing to hire women, but rather there are a lack of, potential candidates for you to hire from, and you're taking extra efforts to go to universities and address that issue as well.
Yes.
So I think those are like, great initiatives. And along the same lines as well. So the next question would be, how do you manage diversity in your organization?
Um, so today we have about 20%, uh, and the reason I say gender diversity is because that's the focus of our organization today. Culturally, I think we have a pretty good mix of about nearly 60% being culturally diverse, which means they are not the local population. They come from any, and that's great because, more languages, more identities at the workplace is good. But specific to gender diversity, because that's part of the company goal. So we're at 20 percent today. Uh, One, of course, so a couple of things come to my mind when I say this, right? One is how do we bring, let's say, I'll take the example of gender diversity only because that's what we're actively working on. But if you ask me a year from now, I hope I'm able to actually add more forms of diversity to the workplace, including one of my personal areas of interest is I want to see how can we bring more people with physical disabilities to our workplace. And what can we do? How can we create jobs that suit a disabled person rather than the opposite, which is typically done, which is how do you get a person who suits the job? So I would like to create job descriptions that a disabled person can do and be equally successful. But maybe that's an year from now. Hopefully, if I have answers around that. But how we manage diversity today? One, of course, I think we have gone heavily into university recruitment because any problem that we want to solve in the Indian context, I think we need to go to basics. So our partnership with universities is stronger than ever before. And we are saying that if job opportunities, employment is a concern, we will take care of that. Let's bring in the students. So that is one, the entry part. Then comes the the engagement and the retention part, which is really where you have a lot more forces, especially social forces at play, including, let's say, the kind of, maybe as a society we have certain expectations from women. Again, my examples are very Indian for obvious reasons, but uh, now as a company, there's, we are not here to change the society, but possibly, uh, I think we have solved the entry problem today. So today we are saying, okay, engagement, and then of course retention. These are two areas that we are working on. And then for me, again, the engagement and the retention bit goes back to what I said in one of my previous answers, which is how are my personal aspirations. And I would add a point here now that my personal aspirations also include the company understanding what my personal limitations are. So I cannot simply be focused on where you want to get to without recognizing what can prohibit you from getting there, right? So it's again incumbent on the company. Now, it may look to you that are we putting too much of onus on the company? But again, if I'm spending 80% of my work life in a particular place, there is no way the organization cannot see me as a whole person. So, back getting back on track, my personal aspirations, if they are connected to, let's say, whatever diversity programs or diversity management, this thing that we have, if it's connected, I will find it. So to answer your question, Shan, in short, how do we manage diversity? Understand that everyone has different personal aspirations and connect them with your organization's processes. And in understanding aspirations, it's not just about where you want to go, it's also about what are the limitations you face as an individual, and therefore, how can we set policies, programs to address these limitations? I mean, one of the most common ones I can give you that most organizations seem to resort to is remote working, right? Uh, Probably it came as a need of the hour because of COVID or whatever, but the fact is, I have a personal aspiration, but my personal limitation is that I cannot travel to my workplace. What did organizations do? They said, okay, work remotely, right? And maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but I'm just trying to give you an example of what I mean by connecting personal aspiration, right? So that's one way of doing it. Second way of doing it is, I think even now it happens, and I'm sure it happens in my company too, that you have job descriptions that are possibly written God knows how many years back, uh, and we try to somewhere force fit everyone into a job description. Um, it makes a lot of sense when it comes to manufacturing, because you need standardization, you need safety, you need common work output. You like, if Apple were producing iPads in a factory, all the iPads need to look the same for standardization. So I totally get it when it comes to, but in knowledge economies like what we do or what most ITES does, I think it's time to rethink who should write the job description. I'd like to believe that in a few, not few years, but maybe a little more than a decade, talent will tell organizations that this is the job I can do. This is what I'm good at. Now, you as a company figure out how are you going to use my skill for which part of your workflow. So, take a typical job description. It typically has about 8 to 10 main accountabilities, 4 to 5 secondary accountabilities. But I, as a person, I excel only in one thing. So why should I offer my entire self to a job and suck at 90% of it, whereas allow me to present my one special skill 100% of the time, right? So I hope I'm not confusing you, but I believe at some point in the industry, if not less than 10 years, but definitely after a decade or so, talent will say, this is what I can offer you. So your job description is redundant. What this talent can offer becomes your job description. And of course, I'm sure all of us will be around to see when it happens and how it happens. But I would say job descriptions will get redundant. And especially when you're managing diversity, and I'm sure by 10, 20 years, gender diversity won't be the only central topic. There'll be so many forms. So for me, the fact that each of us brings different skills to the table is itself the greatest form of diversity we can offer to the workplace. Gender, disabilities, and all of these in many ways would become redundant topics by then. Then it will be about, okay, what skill I bring? Let's say I bring the skill of great consulting skills. You may bring the skill of great listening skills. uh, we will all join together to solve a company's problem, and then we will disband, right? I will not be force fitted into a JD. So I think managing diversity will also require us to really rethink how our jobs are defined and how our jobs are structured.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with that. Organizations should be looking at hiring talented individuals and then placing them where they can, maximize their value rather than just shoeboxing them.
Yeah.
So I just have one final question in this, regard. So recently, indigeneity has become central to, the EDII concept. Do you think managers and organizations are adapting to this?
What would you mean by indigeneity?
Okay, so I think the general notion is diversity, equity, and inclusivity. From India, at least when I was working. So this term EDII is what I've been, exposed to here. And indigeneity essentially is sort of decolonizing and getting the roots of the people of the land back to their
Hmm.
like original roots. So how are you trying to help them, reconnect with their roots and adapt to what was natural to them pre,
Yeah. Yeah.
colonization?
So I think you know, if you again look at the history of how organizations sort of develop, most organizations were started by what today we call as the privileged class. Even if you look at the Indian context, the biggest names you can think of were have all come from the US. And at least that's how they started. Today it's a lot different, but way back in 2000, 2001, soon after the economy opened up, uh, everything was brought in by mostly American, because they were, of course, I mean, they were fairly successful in the business world, and the world's economy was centralized pretty much, in the US. uh, so when you had a affluent white American come and set shop, they would obviously try and look for people who are very similar to them, which means that a certain section, and so this I'm using the Indian example, but you can practically, I think, apply this to any place where you had sort of colonization. I think typically we refer to it as when, let's say, the British were ruling on India, but corporate colonization in a way was when the Americans started starting setting shop around the world. They pretty much came and colonized those places. Probably not as bad as in the past, but in a way there was a monopoly. So they look for people similar. Now, who are the people similar? Obviously, the educated, wealthy, affluent of the land that they arrived in. Now, everybody looks for similarities in the people they work with or hire. So, over a period of time, what happens is a certain way of working, a certain culture of working kind of became the norm. And most of that was reflective of the American culture. Now, what is happening is people have started. So, if I have to give you an example closer to my department, I believe India has knowledge that the rest of the world doesn't. And of course, I'm being arrogant maybe about it, but I look at it that way. We have tons of knowledge available. But look at all our training programs today, including the books we refer to, all the authors that we refer to, and great people, by the way. Talk of Stephen Covey, you talk of Daniel Kahneman, but remember, all of them have come from the West, right? Why is it that India, which is such a great knowledge capital, has amazing brains? How come we've not been able to produce training content? How come we've not been able to produce books that go around the world and teach at the universities, the Harvards and the Oxfords of the world? Why, right? And this, of course, I will then say pretty much this applies even to the APAC region. But now what is starting to happen is one major factor over the last few years, which is now promoting a lot of indigenous, a lot of local talent, a lot of local thought processes, social media. So earlier, for me to have my say and be able to share what I'm thinking required affluence, money, connections. Today, I can put it up on Instagram, I can put it up on Facebook. Anybody who thinks I'm worth reading, or anybody who thinks I'm worth it, will have access to it, and they will pass it on. So it's become it's become more very democratic, that you don't need anybody's permission to become famous, to be heard, as long as you have the content with you. So I think social media is paving a great way for indigenous cultures to thrive. Second, what has happened again in the context of India, but I'm sure this is very true where you have tier one economies, tier two, and tier three economies. Like in India, you have the major cities where you have a lot of English speaking affluent class living. But you have tier two and tier three where it's non English speaking, but the brain power is much better, probably even. So organizations have now realized, including us, right, that tier one is exhausted. Plus, tier one is, you know, it's everybody's taking up tier one. We are now finding success in tier two. Tier two, the challenge could be of communication, language, and all of it. But we are saying, does it really matter? Because if the person is got great technical concept, he knows his stuff very well, The only issue he lacks is English is not this thing, because our entire literature, including our technical literature, is all in English. But the thing is, today technology can explain to you what you don't understand by words. So therefore, we are bringing in a lot of talent, which, unlike the past, does not excel in how they communicate. They may not be the plushest of people you'll find at the workplace, but they got amazing brain and intellect. So automatically, companies are now being forced to say, you know, uh, we embrace this kind of difference also, because at the end of the day, what matters not so much is how you communicate. I mean, how you communicate matters, but whether you know your nouns and pronouns, it really doesn't matter so much. And I think the biggest limiting factor between indigenous and the frontline cultures was communication in English language. That barrier today is pretty much being taken away by technology. Two, by a certain social acceptance that, hey, even if you don't know English, it's okay. I mean, look at South America, Portuguese speaking. Uh, they are ruling the world when it comes to a lot of not ruling the world, but they are doing exceedingly well, and most of their technical conversations are also in Portuguese. The French, they've not given up French. If they are talking to you, they are talking in French or really bad English. If I need to communicate to somebody who's in France, I can use a translator. They are doing very, very well. Uh, and the same applies to many indigenous cultures which suffered because of not knowing the English language, but now they are like, it doesn't matter. We have alternatives to do it. So I think having taken away the language problem, I think it's easy for indigenous cultures to now make a comeback. Unfortunately, it took longer than expected, or it took longer than it should have. But I think it's better late than never. It's great to see indigenous cultures sort of now taking center stage, and I think at some point they are going to remain frontline, because I do believe that English as a language and the dominance of English as a language is going to fade. I'm not going to say it's eliminated. That will be stupid of me to say, but it's fading away. Even in political world, if you see, everybody is so connected to their roots, including, let's say, even from an Indian perspective, our political leadership is so connected to its roots. We see that in the US. We see that everywhere. Everybody sticks to their own local, culture, and I guess it's reflective of what's happening in the society.
Thank you so much, Niranjan. Yeah, I think we touched upon a lot of important topics, like especially, the fact that we have a lot of, culture and resources. They may not necessarily know the
Yeah,
Western way of speaking. That doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have the talent to portray it. So I think those are really important points. So thank you. I think Melody has a couple of questions, so she'll take over.
sure.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much. So we're going to switch gears a little bit, and something we've been talking a lot in class about is artificial intelligence. So the next question pertains to that, which is, do you anticipate your role as a manager and leader changing as AI becomes more relevant? Has anything changed already?
So again, I love going back into history, but uh, one of the reasons why manager's role became so important when this role was introduced is because your manager would approve your leaves. So if you would ask, and he would approve your time and attendance. So if you wanted to go home early, you had to seek your manager's permission. Today, or for the last 5-10 years, nobody goes to their managers for leaves or time and attendance, because everything is recorded in a system, and as long as it is recorded properly, your manager doesn't have to sit and do it every day for you, right? So that's probably the simplest micro level example that I can give you, that AI has already taken over a lot of roles that traditionally managers would play. The areas that managers are therefore now required to invest is the human connect, emotional intelligence, and a lot of focus on well-being of the individual. Even in these areas today, AI is helping you. So AI plays a sort of a supporting role to give manager a lot of data and intelligence about what how his staff is doing with respect to these areas, because you have chatbots that can tell you how engaged your staff is. So all of that is being done. But the manager, therefore, as I said at the beginning, has to have a higher standard of behavior compared to the rest of the team. On similar lines, I would say the manager now has to have a higher skill compared to the rest of the team. So the skills of the managers are going to change, because AI can practically do, like I said, time and attendance, discipline. I don't need a managers were instituted because somebody had to check for discipline of the team. After that, it became about motivation of a team, right? But now a lot of these traditional roles have been either taken by AI or they are no longer relevant anyway to the talent you have available today. But I think the one or two, I would say two things that are absolutely um, going to be very, very relevant to the future. One is emotional intelligence. Two is the ability to be able to solve your, uh, I wouldn't say problems, but the ability to understand you as a human and solve the problems that you face day in and day out. So one of the skill that we have also introduced, but I personally believe is a missing skill in most leadership today, is counseling skills. For me, these two skills become very, very important, which AI, at least from what we see today and all the experiments that go on in that area, I don't think AI will be able to do that. You will still need people, because talent, is obviously becoming very, very it's far more intelligent talent than what we had. So every year, I think the talent, because we work so closely with universities, we see the talent at its rawest, youngest form. Because 2021 is when they all start coming out of college. Super individuals, very brainy people. One of the things that is generally going lower and lower year on year is people's ability to have stronger minds, people's ability to have stronger mental setups. That's where when they join the workforce, I would say it is the manager who should be skilled to take care of all of this, right? Because obviously, I mean, we all understand that there's a direct correlation between your mental health and your productivity. So for me, if we skill the manager to be better at emotional intelligence, the manager to be able to understand how counseling works, how do you shift a person's point of reference from negative to positive, these are the skills that I think are going to be necessary, and AI will not be able to do this.
Sorry, just looking for the unmute button for a second there. Thank you so much for your answer. It's really, really interesting that you touched on kind of the importance of that emotional intelligence and understanding as a human. I think that's something that we talked about a lot as well in class, so that was great to hear. I think Vivek might have something to share.
Yeah, thanks, Melody. I'm just
Yeah.
being cognizant of the time. So, Niranjan, would it be okay if we extend the meeting for another 10 minutes or so? Would that be okay with you?
Should be fine. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Go ahead, Melody.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So shifting gears a little bit, but perhaps not quite fully, our next question pertains to ethical dilemmas. So have you as manager faced ethical dilemmas? And if so, how did you navigate these?
So I think one at a very general level, I'd say because you're managing people, and everyone comes with different expectations and different value systems and beliefs. I think one of the daily ethical dilemmas that a manager goes through, realizing it or not realizing it, is the perception of fairness. Uh, People under a manager, I mean, a manager will be required to take a lot of decisions every day. It's not that all these decisions will be perceived fairly, by people. And the moment somebody perceives it unfairly, I'd like to believe that it kind of dents the manager's reputation in their minds at a very micro level. But almost every day we are making decisions. So they're always going to be a divided jury on whether I did the right thing or not. But the problem with fairness is that, or it's a perception of fairness, right? It doesn't matter whether what I did was technically right or wrong, but if it was perceived to be wrong, I think it dents my position. Therefore, it becomes very incumbent on managers that, for sake of transparency, communicate, communicate, communicate. And then companies got into this culture of open door policy and all of that, which were more symbolic in nature. But the point really was that, you know, if you had like if you have one manager in a company and this problem exists, now multiply this with 50 or 60 other managers in the company, and when people say, well, we believe the organization treats us fairly or unfairly, it's essentially a collective summation of these perceptions of fairness. So at a very micro level, I think practically every day we go through those moments of having to go through ethical dilemmas. But I see the solution to be, more of, hey, communicate as much as you can. And then the second would be consistent. So and they say that, right, that never consciously make a bad precedent. So sometimes you do feel that, the right thing to do is actually opposed to the idea of fairness. But I think one should still stick with fairness, even though today in the moment something else feels as if it's the right thing to do, because the concept of fairness will outlast temporary aspects of what is right or wrong. So for me, it is these two things do come across. And then of course at a real level, yeah, you come across situations where you have to be the judge when it comes to truly ethical dilemmas. But I think that's case to case. But on a daily basis, managers go through this practically every day.
Thank you so much for your answer. Um, we just have one last question, and thank you again so much for extending our meeting time. What does a typical week look like for you at work and outside of work? How do you spend your time?
How do I spend my time? So a typical work week, of course, Monday to Friday, I try to um, s- I usually try to do away with anything on a computer in the first 4 hours of my work day. Um, I like to spend that time talking to people, meeting people at their workplace. Um, so you would usually find me go around, walk, talk to people, just establish an eye contact, say hi to them. And then maybe the second half is about sort of catching up on email, using a computer for your work and all of it. That's broadly how I divide it. One of the things I've started doing this year is I've started maintaining a daily work diary to essentially look at, okay, these are the things I did today. um, this I could have done better, and this I could have this I think I did really well, or this I could have done better. I try and spend about 10-20 minutes at the end of the day just reflecting on how the day went, and it's been helping me. I would admit I've not been consistent at it. I mean, today's almost 90 days of this year are over, so it's not that I have got 90 such recordings, but largely every day I've been trying to spend 10 to 20 minutes just reflecting on how did the day go, what can I do better. It's helping me a lot because especially after you've worked for a long time, a lot of things are autopilot. Even if you don't do anything, I think things happen. And that's for me a sign of decay. So I don't want to get into that. So I'm like, no, let me like question myself and say, okay, could I have done this better? Let's say I agreed on doing something, it's part of my to-do list, and I didn't do it. So what hindered me from doing it? Was it a knowledge issue, or just mere procrastination, just feeling lazy? Or was it because something prevented me from, so that reflection is helping me a lot, helps me sort of prepare for the next day as well. Just interestingly, today I was in the elevator and somebody asked me this question saying, what do you think of to-do lists? And I was thinking, okay, I mean, they have a value, but I think in today's time and age, instead of focusing on to do, and I gave this idea to that individual, and I have not implemented it, but I think I'm going to. But I said maybe the list you should create every morning is what not to do, because once you figure out what not to do, whatever remains is going to be amazing. So I was like, okay, let's. So I just threw this idea at him, saying, okay, let's practice what not to do list rather than a to do list. So yeah, maybe I'm going to try doing it myself in the next maybe I don't know sometime later. But yeah, outside of work, I mean, see, I've been born and brought up in HR, so this is really where I grew up in my professional career. I read, of course, because in my role, it's a professional requirement for me to read and keep myself up to date. Um, it's not just a hobby, it's something I have to do. Two, I personally take a lot of interest in mental health and topics around it. So I am generally in conversations with people who belong to that fraternity. Over the last 3 or 4 years, I've been trying to bring a lot of mental health initiatives. So that's like my outside of work focus right now. So trying to kind of, talk, read, learn. That's what I do outside of work, which eventually will find a way to work, because like for me, work is what defines me. I mean, this is really why I exist to work. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think the piece that you're talking about in terms of reflecting and having that journal actually is really interesting, because yesterday we were just talking about the importance of mindfulness and the importance of, checking in with yourself and being in present. And I think you're
Yes.
completely right. We jump into autopilot so quickly,
Yeah.
but taking the time to reflect is so important. And I think that that's all of our questions. So I'll pass it back to Vivek. Thank you again. Yeah.
Thank you, Melody. Thank you so much, Niranjan. I think I can vouch for the part where you mentioned that you go around and talk to everyone. I think I was one of the employees that engaged in the workforce that way, because I am an introvert myself. So I used to sit on my desk usually. And I think I owe it a lot to you when it comes to talking to other people, seeing how everyone is doing, building that trust with people. I think that's what our professor um, stresses upon a lot, that I think as you move around the organization, you interact with everyone and then you build that trust. And
Yes.
that's a very important factor. So thank you so much. Thanks for taking out time for such a lengthy conversation with us. I think it helps us a lot. And hopefully I'll catch up with you very soon. Um,
Sure.
and that would be all. I would say thank you so much. Thanks once again for answering all our questions and helping us with our project.
No, thank you for inviting me. I know it's really early, so I'm probably in between you and breakfast right now. So I'm going to let you go. Have a great day ahead. Have a great weekend. I'm not sure if it's a long weekend there, but Good Friday, Easter, and all of that. So have a great weekend ahead. All the best for your studies. I'm sure you'll do great. And I'm sure, hopefully someday I would love to meet all of you, and let's see when that happens. But till then, all the very best.
Thank you so much, Niranjan. Enjoy the rest of your day. And definitely, it's a
Thank
long
you.
weekend
Bye
for
bye.
us.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much. Bye.